Hi, this is Scott Wilkinson, host of Home Theater Geeks. In episode 258, I chat with journalist Chris Chinnock about what he's seeing at the Display Week conference this week and what's coming up at the Display Summit conference June 15th and 16th. So stay tuned.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Home Theater Geeks is provided by CacheFly at CacheFly.com.
This is Home Theater Geeks with Scott Wilkinson, recorded June 4th, 2015. Episode 258, live from Display Week. Hey there, Scott Wilkinson here, the Home Theater Geek and editor of AVSForum.com. This week's guest geek is Chris Chinnock, president and founder of Insight Media, a firm that basically researches display aspects of display of all sorts. And he's talking to us directly from the Society of Information Display, or SID conference, and has gratefully, I am grateful that he has agreed to join us right from the show. Hey, Chris, welcome.
Well, thank you, Scott. Appreciate the opportunity to talk.
Yeah, well, there's probably a ton of stuff to talk about. And before we get to it, let me make sure that I make sure that everybody knows that those of you who are watching live at live.twit.tv and logged into the chat room there or at irc.twit.tv can post questions as we go, and I'll pass along as many as I can. So, Chris, you are talking with us from the Society of Information Display Conference, otherwise known as SID or SID. Have you ever wondered, before we get started with that, this always brings a little consternation to me. Some shows you say by their letters, CES, for example. Others you make a word out of, like CEDIA. NAB, I always thought should be NAB, but nobody seems to say that. What is it with SID? Is it SID or is it SID?
It's both.
Man!
Sorry about that.
Okay, so it's interchangeable in this case. You know,
Yes.
there's just no rule, and I live by rules mostly, you know, so. All right.
I
so
usually call it SID. How's that?
SID. Let's call it SID. Okay. So there you are at SID, which is a conference I've been to at least once. Very, very fascinating, where a lot of display technologies, new technologies are introduced and demonstrated. And we see some advancements there as well. But things show up there before they do in consumer products or maybe even professional products, right?
Historically, that has been very true. I think you've seen a little bit of a shift to some of the innovations being shown at CES, at NAB, at some of the other professional shows. But historically, this show has been where the latest innovations in display have been revealed. And it doesn't disappoint this year either. There's always something good to see here, and I saw lots of good stuff.
Lots of good stuff. Well, take us through some of what you saw that you particularly impressed you.
Okay. Well, I was kind of thinking about, I mean, I'm still here, so it's still fresh in my mind, and I usually like to take a day or two to kind of filter through all of that I saw. So this
Sure,
is
there's some digesting going on, I know.
There is some digesting. Yeah, you know this. But I think the number one technology that I saw here was from a company called C-Real. And they were actually off of the trade show floor in a private demo suite that was facilitated by Merck being a big liquid crystal display materials company. And they were hosting this company because this particular display is electronic holography display and requires very advanced liquid crystal materials, as you might expect. Mm. This was, I think, the best demo that I've seen to date of electronic holography display, a real holographic display, as distinguished from a light field display, which I'll tell you about as well, as distinguished from stereoscopic 3D displays, which were in evidence here as well.
Well, I've seen holographic displays as well, but they last time I saw one, it was so rudimentary. It was like almost stick figures,
Yeah.
you know, and it was like, well, I wouldn't really want to watch a movie like that.
Well, it's come a long way, let me tell you. So they have a very sophisticated stack. They actually have 2 liquid crystals, the panels, and then they have 2 separate panels on top of that, which are basically designed to do beam steering. And the whole principle here is when you have a true holographic display, there's a modulator that has to have ideally almost trillions of pixels to be able to replicate all the light points coming from all the different directions that create a hologram. That's obviously really, really hard to do with an electronic display. So that means even with a 4K or even an 8K display, you get a fairly rudimentary pixelated hologram. So they've solved this problem by, instead of creating and calculating and displaying all of those holographic pixels on a large display, what they do is eye track the user. This is a single user display, and they only generate that view where that person is looking at the display. That's a significant reduction in the computations that are needed to create the hologram, as well as the pixels that are needed to create a decent image.
So they're actually pointing a camera at your eyes and gauging where they're looking in order to make these calculations? Yeah.
There's the eye tracking technology is well established. It's in lots of products now. So you can use infrared. Usually they're infrared cameras that will track your eyes, and so by doing that, they can then calculate your head position relative to the screen, and exactly where you're looking on the screen, and then only generate those particular pixels of the big screen that they need to.
So are you actually looking at a screen, sort of like
you're looking
flat
into
panel?
a box? Yeah, you're looking
into a box. Okay.
Yeah.
And you look into this box and you see 3D images inside the box.
Yes, exactly. But these 3D images are now true holograms. So they've got appear to be full volume. You don't need glasses, of course. And it's actually interactive too. So they have a kind of a joystick device that you can move an object, rotate it, move it forward, move it backward. And this can go actually fairly close to you and go almost to infinity in the distances as well. And you know what usually happens with other 3D displays is you start to lose fidelity as things get too close to you. You can't use them; they get fuzzy. But that doesn't happen in a real holographic display.
Now, is this using lasers as in a true hologram?
It actually uses, in this case, very narrow band LEDs that go into a very special backlight that collimates the display to go through, that collimates the light to go through the displays.
Okay. Titus in the chat room is asking, are there any videos of this holographic apparatus that we're talking about?
I did not shoot a video, and frankly, you would have a really, really hard time doing that.
Of course, because you couldn't, I mean, unless you shot 3D. And I have to tell you, I've seen you wandering through trade shows before with a 3D camera.
That's
what would
true.
happen if what would happen if you shot that hologram with a 3D camera, with 2-lens camera?
It depends on the separation of the lenses. I'm not sure the camera that I have would be able to capture that well enough. It's tricky to do. It's very tricky. I mean, the light is real. You are creating light in space, so you should be able to see something, but it's hard to see the depth volume. You're trying to capture things that are moving in depth with a 2D camera.
And are the objects that you're looking at, that you're seeing, do they look solid or do they look sort of translucent?
Actually, they were fairly solid, and you mentioned watching movies. They actually showed that you could watch a movie. They they took some content that was developed by Philips a number of years ago using their 2D plus depth format, and they rendered that and actually ran the movie in kind of a stereoscopic format in this display.
Wow! And you could look into this box and watch the movie, and it looked like it was sort
3D?
of a holodeck kind of a thing.
Well, it looked really. This wasn't really like a hologram. This was like looking at a 3D movie on your TV or in the cinema.
Oh, I see. But without glasses.
But without glasses.
Yeah, which is of course the holy grail for 3D, as much as there can be a holy grail for 3D. I mean, 3D seems to have had its day again, and now it's kind of passing, at least at home. Well, we can talk about that, but what was I going to ask? Oh, the size of this box. How big is the image?
It's I'm trying to think. I would say about maybe 18 inches square or so, something like that. Now,
and
actually,
18 inches in depth.
Actually, no. You can go. It looked to me perhaps 3 or 4 feet in front and probably 6 feet in back, maybe further.
Oh.
Yeah, it had tremendous depth behind.
Muchacho in the chat room is asking that question. What are the dimensions of the box? So about 18 inches square, roughly, is the window that you're looking at, and then images look to be ahead of it or behind it by some number of feet.
Correct.
Wow.
Yeah.
What are their plans? Do they expect this to be a consumer product, a professional product?
Yeah, it's not a consumer product. Professional product would be the place to start with this. It's going to be expensive for sure.
Yeah.
But what they showed me was almost a 2-year-old demo, as I recall. And in their facility in Dresden, they have a prototype of a much larger one that uses some more advanced technologies. They had done some kind of cheat things to create the images in this particular display. But a much improved architecture is apparently in place in Dresden. And a bigger display. So, I hope to get to Dresden, Germany someday.
Yeah, really. Or they bring it to next year's SID.
Yeah, it's not portable now, but which is why I didn't. But.
Yeah. I've seen other examples of a quote unquote holographic type display, which use half silvered mirror. Half transmission mirror at a 45-degree angle kind of thing. Is that anything
Ghost.
Like what this is?
No, that's called the Pepper's Ghost.
Pepper's Ghost. I was trying to think of the name. That's right.
Yeah. And I, it really irks me when people call that a holographic display. It is not a holographic display at all.
I agree.
It's a flat image that creates sort of appears to be floating in space because you're re-imaging it in a different plane. And it's a great effect. I like the effect, but
it's what is it? Over 100 years old or something? It's an old effect.
Yeah, exactly.
But it ain't holography.
It's not holography,
or even 3D per se.
Correct.
Well, while we're on the subject of 3D, let me ask you about this. This isn't about SID particularly, but we'll take a minute on it. As you know, 3D with glasses has come and gone several times. Mm-hmm. And the most recent one, you remember CES 2 or 3 years ago, everybody was abuzz about, 3D at home, 3D TVs and glasses and so on. And now, last CES, nobody said boo about it.
Right. Of course.
And yet, TVs are still shipping with it. Movies are still being released commercially that use 3D. 3D Blu-rays, I guess, are still being released. Is it true that the latest attempt at 3D was also a failure, as the previous ones were, or is that just the way it looks and not really the case?
I think for the consumer market in the U.S. and Europe for the most part, I think it was it's a failed cycle for a number of reasons. Now that cycle is still ongoing very much in Asia. A lot of these 3D movies, a lot of content is being created in Asia. A lot of 3D TVs are selling very well in Asia. So we're still in an upgrowth phase there. Now, whether it will go through the same cycle that we saw here is hard to say. Mm-hmm. But clearly the aversion to wearing glasses was underestimated, I think, by most people. Mm-hmm. the content, these proprietary content, when the things were launched, the competing technologies, the confusion. There are a number of reasons.
You've seen, I'm sure, the various attempts at glasses-free 3D TVs, not this holographic thing that you were talking about, but, the company whose name is now escaping me. But you've seen those attempts.
Sure.
Is that anything worth thinking about or
I think
expecting down the pike?
Yeah, the kind of class of autostereoscopic or glasses-free displays that are mostly in the market today are I think, a transition technology. They're based on lenticular arrays or parallax barrier arrays that deliver, 3 to 10 or 20 or 30 views that can allow you to kind of move your head side to side, but you do see a stereoscopic view, but you also have these transition zones, and you have to be in the sweet spot, and walking past them can create these very strange artifacts. And in addition, the depth volume that you create this is much reduced from what you get with a glasses-based solution. So all of these compromises mean it's kind of so-so, very much so-so.
Yeah. Stream TV Networks is the company I was thinking of.
Yeah, and they have certainly one of the better implementations of this. There's no doubt. But there are those compromises I mentioned.
Yeah. Untoward is talking about 3D as a feature in the chat room. He says, I got a 3D Vizio E-Series TV, but it went out before I had a chance to put it through its paces. And Vizio dropped 3D altogether from all of their TVs in 2014 and now 2015. So I think you're right, at least in the U.S. And probably in Europe as well. It's on the downswing.
Yeah, but I will tell you this. 3D is coming back, but it's not being mentioned because it's coming in kind of through the back door. And the way that's happening is virtual reality.
And are you seeing some virtual reality stuff at SID?
A little bit. There was a few more augmented reality things here.
Okay, well, before we get back to SID then, tell us a little bit about virtual reality and augmented reality and where we are with that.
Okay. Well, it's actually first of all, I think virtual reality is a couple of years ahead of augmented reality. Virtual, of course, is where you have a completely immersive environment. You're wearing a headset or goggles or whatever you want to call it, a head-mounted display. And augmented reality allows you to see through to see the natural world around you with information overlaid on top of that. In both cases, we're starting to see convergence of a whole bunch of different technologies and solutions that are absolutely necessary to make these markets happen. This hasn't really happened before. I mean, certainly VR has come and gone several times over the years. I mean, that's almost a 30-year-old technology. But there's a whole bunch of different things that are converging now that are making this far more viable. And on the VR side, when Facebook bought Oculus a couple of years ago for $2 billion, it's suddenly got on everybody's roadmap, and there's a ton of people working on tons of technology and applications here. So it's a very hot topic, and similarly on the AR side.
Yeah, it's gotten so hot, in fact, that I recently heard a news story on NPR. National news story about Oculus Rift in particular, and movie makers and the challenges they face with making a movie in VR, which is like unheard of. I mean, with current movies, you look forward, you look at the screen, you see the movie, the story is told, and you're happy or you're not. But with VR, of course, you can look around and up and down and all around, which means you've got to shoot in a 360-degree spherical pattern. And then you'd have no idea what your viewers are going to be looking at.
Yeah, exactly. It's a completely new medium and art form, and no one really knows the potential, the pitfalls, the opportunities here, and frankly, that's why they're kind of excited about it.
Yeah, I would agree. Okay, let's get back to SID. Tell us some other stuff you've seen there that's been of interest.
Well, let's actually continue a little bit on the VR AR theme, because there were a couple of announcements here that are relevant to that. In particular, I think the best VR headset I've seen to date is the Oculus Crescent Bay device that they've been showing for about 6 months or so now. And you have it's very hard to see pixels in that. You can see a little bit, but it's now getting to the point where you don't have that big screen door effect. You don't have a lot of smearing of the images. The head tracking and the image update is getting very good.
Yeah, I must admit, I saw an example of Oculus Rift, I think. Must have been in March, that I was not impressed with. I mean, I saw a big screen door effect, looked like pretty low res. Moving my head around there was a delay. It kind of almost made me a little sick. So, I kind of went away from that going,
It's much, much better in Crescent Bay.
Okay, cool.
Okay. But what people really want, and I think that's about maybe 2.5 megapixel kind of display. What people really want is a 4K display for those things. Now you've got enough pixels that you can have a wide field of view. You're not going to see any pixelization, any screen door effect, any of that. So, and so toward that end, what we saw here at SID was actually two new display panels, 4K displays, 4K by 2K. One was from AUO at a 6-inch diagonal size, and one was from Tiama, a Japanese-Chinese conglomerate, and a 5.2-inch size. You know what the pixel density of that is?
No, but it must be phenomenal.
847.
847 pixels per inch, right?
Yeah.
Man. And current TVs, even an Ultra HD TV at a 65-inch size is, 100 or 2 pixels per inch, something like that.
Yeah, in that range.
Yeah. Unbelievable. Well, this was my next question for you, actually, because with a VR headset, you need tiny little displays, obviously, because they're like sitting right here.
Yeah. And
to get 4K into that small of a size, I guess that's the point of these demos you're telling us about, is that it's getting smaller and smaller.
Yeah. So the Oculus trend has been to use large flat panels now as the image source for the head mount. That's ignited a whole trend in this direction now, which is why these high density flat panels, which are they're being developed for smartphones and phablets for the most part, but will leverage directly into the VR world. That's why this is so enabling. Can you even put a 5-inch, 5-inch displays in a headset? No, it's just one. It's just one.
Oh, and then it's what, split into two? I mean, you have to have separate images for the right eye and left eye, right?
Yeah, exactly. Just create the images side by side.
I gotcha. And this kind of reminds me of the whole Google Cardboard thing, right?
Yep.
Where you put a smartphone inside of a cardboard thing and strap that on your head, and it gives you VR. The poor man's VR, right? So this is that idea of taking a 5-inch or a 6-inch display and using it for VR is a similar kind of idea, right?
Oh yeah, and that there's probably 24 companies out there that are doing stick your smartphone into a headset kind of design.
Oh, okay. Okay, so we got a 4K little display that can be used in a VR headset without pixelization. I assume the processing is fast enough that when you move around, things move more normally, more naturally.
That will be a bit of a challenge. There's a lot more pixels now to update, so that will take a little bit more.
Okay, so lead us through a few other things that you've been excited about there at SID.
Okay. I guess kind of continuing on this VR theme a little bit, the other way that you can create either an AR or a VR image is through a micro display of some sort. So this is an even higher pixel density display, things that are 1500, 2000, 2500 ppi. And then you use some optics to magnify that and create a virtual image.
Okay.
And there are tons of little micro displays out there, LCD displays, LCOS displays that can do this. But what we saw at SID was a new technology, well, a sort of new technology, actually an update from a technology that was introduced last year at SID from a company called Ostendo.
Okay.
Now, what they do is actually take, it's a very sophisticated process. They call it a quantum photon imager, a QPI.
Wow, that sounds cool.
Yeah, the name's great, isn't it?
Yeah, really great.
So in a QPI, the idea is you create pixels from little tiny LEDs, RGB LEDs at the micro level. I mean, think of an LED wall where the tightest pixel pitch now is in 0.5 millimeters to a millimeter to 2 millimeters. Shrink that down by 100 times.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, that right away makes me think of the whole idea of when LED backlights on LCD TVs first came out, and even today, a lot of companies call those LED TVs. And
yes.
I object to that because it's not. It's an LED backlight or an LED illuminated LCD TV. And what I thought an LED TV should be is a direct array of LEDs producing the picture, but they'd have to be a heck of a lot smaller than they are now. And this is what you're telling us, that this might be possible.
Well, it's not really for a direct view TV. This would be a micro display kind of solution.
Oh, okay.
Okay, that would be used in like a little Pico projector to create a small image. It could be used in AR or VR headsets, or in a head-up displays. A head-up display being a HUD for an automobile or an aircraft or something of the sort.
Right, right. I guess there's nothing preventing anybody from scaling that technology up to a big screen TV. It would just be prohibitively expensive, maybe.
Yes, exactly. And actually, Sony did something like that a few years ago at CES. They had I think they call it a crystal display, which was... Oh,
yeah. I do remember that.
Yeah, but that's just not commercially viable right now.
No.
But what Ostendo does, at least for a micro display, it may be commercially viable. This is a completely wafer process. So they have a CMOS wafer. They get a red LED wafer. They slap on top of that. They take a green LED wafer. They slap that on top, and then a blue one. Put it all together. Put another optical kind of wave guiding layer on top of that. Slice it up, package it, micro display.
Cool, man.
It is pretty cool.
Yeah. You're undoubtedly seeing a lot of quantum dot there as well. We've talked about quantum dots a little bit on the show, where, well, you explain to us what quantum dots are and where we are with that today. Okay.
So in the principle behind quantum dots is that you have a blue LED that excites this quantum dot material. It's a crystal, and the size of the crystal is directly proportional to the color output that's generated. So you create these crystals, you run them through some kind of a filtering process to get these very fine group of crystals all in the same size, these quantum dots, and those become red emitters or green emitters or whatever color you want. Okay. And so there's kind of three places that you can put that in a flat panel display. One is directly on the LEDs themselves. Those are not commercially available yet. You can put them into a long optical element that sits on the edge of an edge-lit backlight. So you've got basically blue LEDs illuminating this quantum dot bar, which then creates red, green, and blue light, which goes into the light guide, and then you have a quantum dot TV. And then the third way to do that is with a film. You embed these into a film that covers the whole surface of the display.
And that's particularly, I think that would, am I correct that would mostly be used with a full array LED backlit TV?
It doesn't have to be. It could be, the bar approach has to be an LED, it has to be an edge lit. The film approach could be edge or direct.
Oh, okay. All right. And one of the things that characterizes quantum dot technology that makes it pretty exciting is that you can tune, as you said, you can tune these little quantum dots, little crystals, to be whatever size you want them to be very precisely and emit whatever color you want them to emit.
Yep.
And that allows us, it allows the TV to actually approach this fabled color gamut that we all hope will come someday, called BT 2020.
Yeah.
In which the red, green, and blue are what are called single wavelength primaries. So they're very narrow spectrally, but it provides a much wider range of colors that the TV can reproduce, which is sort of the ultimate goal for UHD, I think. I mean, we're not quite there yet, at least not with most TVs. We have a couple of laser projectors that can do it, but quantum dots get pretty close, don't they?
They do, and I actually dug a little bit deeper into this at the event here, and there's kind of two camps on this right now. There's the cadmium quantum dot materials providers that it's actually cadmium selenide that they make these out of, and then there's the indium phosphide camp. It's another material to make the quantum dots from. And the folks that are, at least one company that's in this cadmium-free camp is using that term to try and create a controversy, really, about the environmental effects of cadmium. And that has had some political repercussions. The Parliament in the EU has now redirected some of the regulatory bodies there to relook at the exemption that's currently in place for these cadmium-based quantum dots, to relook at that exemption to see if cadmium-free quantum dot materials can be viably introduced, and therefore we get cadmium-based out of the market.
Mm. Well, I wonder if what did you say? Indium was the other one?
Indium phosphide, yeah.
Indium phosphide. I wonder if that's going to have any less environmental impact ultimately when people throw those TVs away as opposed to cadmium.
Well, here's what one of the guys at QD Vision told me. He says if you look at the total carbon footprint of creating the cadmium quantum dots, of creating the TVs and recycling that and all that, and the efficiency that you get in the TV, in other words, the electricity you save in running the TV with a cadmium-based quantum dot, and you compare that to the cadmium-free ones, again, from that total energy and environmental footprint point of view, that it's actually much worse from that point of view in the indium phosphide, or the cadmium, so-called cadmium-free solution.
Yep.
So
there's no easy answer, is there?
Well, this becomes more of a political thing here. They politicized the cadmium component of this, and focusing on this one particular element in one particular part of the ecosystem, when you really need to look at the whole cradle to grave kind of consideration.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Makes sense to me. Yeah. You saw a couple of displays there with quantum dots that you have. I think we have a couple pictures of. I just wanted to make sure we showed those.
Yeah.
I think they're called, the ones I sent up to John are QD1 and QD2. Okay, here's one of them. Tell us what we're looking at here.
Okay, this is in the QD Vision booth. This is a new, on the left is a new monitor from Philips. This is, I think, the first monitor. It's a quantum dot monitor that comes close to that 2020 gamut. And on the right is an Apple Cinema display that doesn't even it does not have as wide a color gamut. It's going to be half as expensive again.
So it's going to be the Apple TV, you say, is or the Apple monitor less expensive?
Is more expensive. Yes.
Oh, more expensive, and yet it doesn't approach the same color gamut as the new Philips.
Correct. Now to be fair, that's also an all-in-one PC on the Apple side, so it's not quite an apples to apples comparison, so to speak.
So to speak. All right, I get you. And I think we have one other QD shot there just to show, I think, some difference between the specs. Yeah. Okay, so tell us what we're looking at here. Oh, it's comparing an OLED to a QE quantum dot.
Exactly. So this is a commercially available LG TV, and OLED it does not meet even the full NTSC color gamut spec, where the quantum dot one does. And where you'll really see the difference between these differences in the color gamuts and the ones that you can that are approaching 2020 or have wider is particularly in the red. There was actually Nanosys had a very good demo. They had 3 side-by-side TVs and with different configurations, and in the widest color gamut, you can really see that the color of that Coke is deep red, and what it should be, that Coke logo, right?
Right.
And the others are clearly not as deep and starting to push into the orange or an orangey red. And brands are very, very picky about their colors and their logos.
They spend millions of dollars on them.
Yeah, of course,
including the specific color of the logo. And Coke,
that's the point.
For many decades has been suffering horribly from the fact that their Coca-Cola logo and cans and everything shown on TV they're orange. They don't have the right color red.
Right, that's it.
There are plenty of other examples. The buses in London, I've heard, are outside the normal gamut that we use, and so on. But of course, when we talk about wide color gamuts and high dynamic range, which I want to ask you about next, we need to talk also about content that was captured with that wide gamut and is transmitted to the TV that is capable of displaying it. And that's an ecosystem that isn't quite settled down yet either, is it?
That's correct. Now, in reality, we've had cameras that can capture wide gamut for quite some time. A lot of the cinema class cameras can capture it right now. They can also capture a high dynamic range, by the way.
Right.
And there are some consumer grade cameras that are becoming available that can do that as well. But the standards to process this and to create the master formatting, the techniques, and the formats for distribution are still in flux.
Right. Speaking of wide color gamut, I just want to make sure everybody knows that you wrote an article about wide color gamuts, the promises and challenges, that is now posted on AVS Forum. So if you want to read more about what Chris has been thinking about in terms of wide color gamut, that's a good one. I like that article quite a bit, and I thank you for posting it on AVS.
Well, thank you. And actually, just a little bit of self-promotion here.
Sure, go ahead.
We're also producing an event called Display Summit in about 10 days in Orlando. And that's going to have wide color gamut, high dynamic range, color accuracy, all on the agenda with panel discussions, presentations, and actually some very unique side-by-side demos to illustrate some of those things as well. Yeah.
Before we finish today, we'll come back to Display Summit because I would like to get a little bit more detail on what that's going to be.
Sure.
Because it really sounds fascinating. But before we do, I just want to make sure that we get a couple of these photos in. You sent a couple pictures of what's claimed to be the world's largest this or that.
Yeah.
So let's take a quick look at those if we can find them. There was the world's largest curved UHD TV, I think.
Yeah, 105 inches
100,
or 15,
110, I think.
110,
or maybe.
there you go. Yeah.
And there it is.
Yeah.
Now, who made this one? It's curved, too, and we'll talk about that in a second, too.
Well, this and the other biggest display photos that you see here, both come from Chinese companies. This is very indicative of what's been happening at SID as well as in the industry. I mean, it used to be, the Japanese companies were we used this as the premier showcase, and then it soon became the Taiwanese, and then now the Koreans. Now it's the Chinese who are showing the biggest and the best kind of demos here.
Mm-hmm. I must admit, I have often said, it used to be the U.S. was the premier maker of TVs. Then it was Japan. Then it was Korea. Now, I would say it's probably Korea, but China is coming up fast.
Oh, yeah. Coming
really
up fast.
fast.
Yep.
And so my question, which is all total speculation, is who's next?
I don't think anyone's going to challenge China for any time soon.
You don't think so?
No, because there's so much capacity already in place, and there were a number of presentations that talking about how fast it's going to expand even more. Most of that in China, and there's going to be an oversupply for the next 3, 4, 5 years if all those fabs are implemented as planned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Eric Duckman in the chat room is saying the exact same thing. Japan to Korea to China. Do you think that the Chinese fabs and manufacturers and so on are going to end up in being able to compete with the very best that Korea and Japan can do? I'm thinking in particular of Samsung and Sony, which typically produce really wonderful TVs, and LG is big on OLED. I've seen some OLEDs from the Chinese companies as well, yeah, which I think probably mostly came from LG Display, the part of LG that actually manufactures the raw panels. Yeah. But my question to you is, do you think that the Chinese models that end up coming out from Hisense and TCL, they're wanting to make inroads into the U.S., are they going to have products that can compete at the highest level?
The short answer is yes.
Mm.
Yeah. They have really come on very, very strong, very fast. They've got good product. They may be lacking a little bit in some of the sophistication of the electronics and the nuances, but in the panel technology, they've learned very, very quickly. And any defects, I'm pretty sure we're going to be made up very rapidly.
Titus in the chat room is saying, maybe Canada. I don't think so.
No.
I was thinking maybe Asia, India, maybe someplace in Africa, possibly. But you're saying that we're looking pretty far down the line. China's going to be there for a long time in that position.
I think so, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk a little bit then about, unless there's something else from SID that you want to make sure we talk about, we can turn our attention to Display Summit.
Let's see, there was, just maybe a couple other things. One of the other interesting technologies I was looking at here, again for AR, primarily for augmented reality, is getting away from these kind of clunky optics to what's called waveguide optics. And so there were some interesting demonstrations of technology advancing in this area as well. That's going to make the visual experience much more compelling, much more easy to for less eye strain, easy to find the image, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I've always wondered about if people reject 3D glasses, how are they going to accept headsets? Head-mounted displays.
That's a very valid question. And I guess I think a lot of the people in the AR space who are thinking about consumer applications think like Microsoft and HoloLens. I think are really, I think they're kind of way off base here. I just don't see a compelling consumer application right now. I do see a number of compelling commercial and professional applications where, it's your job to wear the headset and get your job done. Well, that's what you do.
Okay, sure, that makes sense. I'm thinking more of the consumer, of course.
Yeah, the consumer, I don't see a very compelling use case for some of the stuff they're talking about. In VR, I can see some stuff happening there, especially when you have immersive 360-degree content, and you can start to insert, other people into this game, your friends to join you at watching a sporting event or inside a video game. And this kind of capability was actually demonstrated in the Intel keynote at SID here this year.
That does remind me that that VR has been around for a while, and I think that it's an excellent use case in gaming. Oh, yeah. Because you are in an immersive environment, and you can look around, and maybe some monster is coming at you from the side, and you have to look over there to shoot it or whatever. Movie making, though, seems to be more problematic. There was a comment in the chat room earlier that I wanted to just touch on that had something to do with this. Blue Rules asks or mentions, a movie in VR seems unreachable to me because the director would have to shoot in 3D, and where would the sound come from in relation to where you're looking? The whole issue of 3D sound in a VR environment has to do with virtualization of the earphones, presumably, that you would wear.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a big challenge that we're not going to see anything definitive. Well, we're seeing a lot of experiments now, as you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure I got that in there.
Well, the sound is actually being very considered as part of this experience, as you might expect. And if you have a 360-degree or spherical camera capture shot, and let's say an explosion happens, to your right when you're looking in one direction, if you turn your head to look at that explosion, that sound should remain fixed in space. So, and they realize this, and that's exactly what they're trying to do at this point.
Once again, a lot of computational power to do that, though,
yes.
Because as it tracks your head, it's got to basically shift the perspective of the sound with respect to your head, while in order to keep it in a fixed place outside your head in space.
Exactly. It's almost like the sound is a fixed reference frame, but the video is a moving reference frame.
Yeah. One last question for you: what do you think of curved screens? We saw some here at the show. We saw a photograph of one. What's your hit on that?
There was one paper that talked about the advantages of a curved screen there, and there was some mild benefit, I think, for looking at reading text and some other things. But that was not even an electronic display; it was a paper display. Yeah. So I think there's a reason that movie theater screens are curved, and it's not just because of the projection optics. It does create a sense of immersion because the light points from one side are more evenly balanced to the eye, so it does have a subtle 3D effect.
But those screens are 20, 30, 40, 50 feet wide.
Exactly, and in a TV, the radius of curvature would be, it's like it's tens of feet in back of you. It's way. It's not focused on the person for sure.
Right.
So it's not really accomplishing that completely. And in reality, as you walk past a lot of these things, you can see very strange reflections and distortions. And I think if it's one person in a sweet spot and the lights are controlled, that's the other thing. You get strange reflections from the lights in the room.
Yes.
If it's a dim room with controlled lights and a single or one or two viewers in the sweet spot, I think you'll get a mild immersive effect. Otherwise, not so much.
Not so much, yeah. Getting back to VR and 360 and so on, Lawn Dog in the chat room is saying would make it easier if the sound was recorded in 360. Then the computer could coordinate with your viewpoint rather than mathematical computations. I think that's probably true. Just another piece of the puzzle that people are working on. You don't really deal much with audio, do you? You're pretty strictly a display kind of guy, right?
Yes, but when we get into the immersive audio, I'm tracking that quite a bit because that's very much, especially in the theatrical part anyway, that's very much part of that experience.
Right, exactly. Okay, so in the 10 minutes or so we have left, let's talk about Display Summit, which is coming up. Tell me the dates again.
June 15 and 16 in Orlando. It's like a Infocom pre-show.
Okay,
so
Infocom
Monday,
is
Tuesday.
immediately after that.
Yeah.
And Infocom is another show like SID where a lot of display technologies are introduced and prototypes and so on. I guess it's meant more for large-scale theatrical presentation. Is that sort of its orientation?
Well, I would say it's larger screens. Yeah, I mean, you don't see a lot of mobile devices there because mostly it's you're using your own personal device or maybe a commercialized tablet or something to do the mostly control kind of things.
I remember I used to go to Infocom when it was in LA, and there was this thing called the projector shootout, which was I think mostly commercial cinema projectors showing really big pictures, and you could walk around and look at each one and judge them and so on. They don't do that anymore, do they?
No, they dropped that a good 10 years ago.
Well, it shows you how long it's been since I've been there.
and the reason, frankly, was because they felt that the image quality had gotten so good that it was starting to become difficult to distinguish between these projectors. And the flaws that were visible, they were starting to object to having those flaws identified now.
So manufacturers were pulling out.
They were.
Wow. Okay. So right before InfoComm is Display Summit, and this is a pre-InfoComm 2-day event that you're hosting, that Insight Media, your company, is hosting, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So tell us about what we might expect if we were to go there.
Okay. Well, what we try to do with this is create kind of a thought leadership event that focuses on kind of these leading edge technologies, and at least I like to think of it as the whole pixel pipeline, from content generation through pixel processing, through distribution, and then of course out to the display itself. And the second part of that is we like to also, in some sense, bring back the shootout idea by organizing very orchestrated and coordinated demos that are multi-company demos there that often will have the same content running on the same displays for a very specific purpose of evaluating some feature or technology that is, again, kind of cutting edge and is very difficult for industry to assess in one-off demos at this company or that booth. And so doing this side by side is they find to be very, very beneficial to them.
Very valuable. I agree entirely. And I would imagine that the side-by-side, that the attributes that you are going to be looking at in some of these side-by-side demos will include wide color gamut, which we talked about a little earlier, and high dynamic range, which are the
Correct.
two big things, I think, coming down the pike for Ultra HD.
Yep. And the third one we're going to do is actually a very fine pitch LED display, a video wall display versus a 2x2 LCD display.
Oh, okay. So we were talking about fine pitch LED before. Is that kind of what you were talking about here?
Exactly. This is a 1.2 millimeter pitch LED display in a 108-inch diagonal, right next to a 2x2 55-inch LCD video wall array. And we're going to run the same content on that and with a bunch of different images. And we actually have created a survey for people to start to judge the resolution, the color, the viewing angles, that kind of thing.
Wow, wow. Now, on a 2x2 LCD video wall, basically you do have the bezels between the screens. So you have these, they might be pretty thin, but they're still there. You can still see them. It's not like a big giant screen. It's, well, it is, but it's with a cross kind of in the middle of it. What is the LED screen going to look like? I mean, if those each of those elements are only 6 inches or so, that there's going to be a lot of that, right?
Oh yeah, and that's part of what we'll be looking at, because you're right. And what we're trying to understand is how impactful is that bezel for various applications and various images and various viewing distances.
Mm-hmm. What is the resolution? I assume that the LCD one, you'll either be using 1080p or 2160p Ultra HD for each of them, which would multiply the resolution by 4. What is the resolution of the LCDs you're using, and what is the resolution of the LEDs you're using?
Yeah, so we decided for the common content, we're going to actually run 1080p content to both. The reason being the LED wall is 1080p, 1920 by 1080. The LCD wall is actually 4K because it's 4 full HD panels. And we can't really run 21p content to both because the LED wall just won't accept that content. It can't scale it down. But the LCD wall can scale it up.
Okay. Let's see. Mike Heiss is in the chat room. Hey, Mike. He got in here late, but he wanted to know if you've said anything or if there's going to be anything at Display Week on foldable, bendable, or roller printer displays.
That wasn't really in my beat to look at that, to tell you the truth. There were some papers that talked about that. In fact, one of the keynotes given by LG here basically made this very long-winded argument about the benefits of OLED, and finally concluded that OLED was going to be the best technology for achieving a bendable and foldable display on a plastic substrate, and would be superior to an LCD approach. That actually may be correct, but the other keynote from TCL went to great lengths to say that for TVs, we've looked at OLED, we've looked at quantum dot LCDs, and for TVs, we think quantum dot is the way to go, and that's going to be the winner over OLED. So.
Okay, getting back to Display Summit, actually the conference you're at now, SID, is also known as Display Week. And
true.
In 2 weeks, you'll be at Display Summit. And right after that, I will be at CE Week in New York, but that's neither here nor there. So this video wall demo just sounds fascinating to me. I'm very interested in hearing what the result of that is. What about HDR, high dynamic range?
Sure.
And wide color gamut. Tell us about some of those demos you expect to see there.
Okay, so there'll be actually two demos in HDR. One is going to be Philips is going to come with two TVs. One they'll be running in a standard dynamic range mode, and the other will be in high dynamic range mode. And that will be content that's been mastered and distributed using their format. So the idea is you have either one or two streams of this content that you can feed to either TV. It understands the capabilities of the TV, and it renders standard dynamic range content on one or HDR content on the other. And of course, we expect to see the HDR TV having higher luminance, better black levels, and maybe even better color gamut.
Mm-hmm. But the Philips HDR system kind of automatically uses metadata or something like that to automatically say, this TV can do HDR, so I'm going to feed it all I can. This one can only do SDR, so I'm going to scale back before I feed it.
Well, the metadata for making that decision and for starting those transformations is delivered to the TV.
The TV takes care of it. Okay, yeah.
The TV says, I have this capabilities. I'll use this metadata. I'm going to process it for best display based on my capabilities.
Yeah. Now, here's a real concern I have about high dynamic range, and I'd love your take on it. We have several different systems. We have the Philips system. We have Dolby Vision. We have the SMPTE Open Standard. We have one from Technicolor. I think we even have one from the BBC in England.
Yes.
And my question is, that I still don't know a good answer to, is can these multiple HDR systems coexist? And if a TV that has high dynamic range capability receives one of them and then receives a different one from a different source or whatever, will it be able to handle it? Or is this going to be another format war? What's going on here? How is this going to get played out, do you think?
I don't think anyone knows the answer yet.
That's why I ask it every place I can. Yeah.
My take is that there's still a lot of discussions and negotiations going on about this. You know, there's IP rights here. There's business consideration issues. I think it's frankly quite likely we'll end up with 2 or 3 formats, and the displays are just going to have to learn to accept the different formats and build in the silicon to do that, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. It kind of reminds me of the different audio formats like DTS, Dolby Digital, so on. AV receivers have the capability of decoding them all, basically. So TVs might very well have to have the capability of understanding and rendering HDR signals using one or another of these different approaches.
I think that's probably going to be the reality, but it also creates another series of versions that the content creators have to go through. I mean, the permutations.
Which they're going to hate. They're going to hate having to, oh man, I've got to master to this and then to this.
And
one
it's
of the
not
big
just,
problems.
It just multiplies. You can't believe how many versions there are for this. You know, for different languages and different bit rates and different formats. It's literally hundreds.
Yeah, it's insane. And then what are you going to be showing in terms of wide color gamut? I assume a 709 display next to a P3 or a 2020 display.
Yeah, actually, there's one. Let me just finish with the HDR because the other
sorry.
player there. Yeah, the other player there is Canon, and they're going to bring one of their new HDR cameras. I think it's probably I think it was the C300. I think, as I recall, was the new one.
Yeah, C300 Mark II, I believe.
Mark II. Yeah, exactly. And they're going to basically kind of repeat what they did at NAB, a live camera through processing to their HDR wide color gamut monitor.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of a live demo of onset processing and display.
Man, that Canon what was it, a 2000 nit, I guess, high dynamic range display in their booth at NAB. Man, oh man, that looked good.
Yeah, I know, and very bright in that dark room, you'll notice.
Yeah. Maybe too bright, but you know, we're still experimenting with things.
And that's another one of those pieces of the standards puzzle that's not set. Is, you know, what should be the highest brightness? Should those be peak brightnesses? What's the average luminance that these should be? You know, we don't know these things. We
don't know these things yet. I'm very frustrated. Okay, one last word about wide color gamut. What can we expect to see at Display Summit about that?
Okay, so what we're going to do is I've got a bunch of content, wide color gamut content that I've been able to put together with the goal of showing that's been mastered in both 709 and 2020, with the goal of being able to show this content kind of in sequence, so we can see exactly what colors are outside of the 709 gamut, which will now become visible in the 2020 gamut.
Mm-hmm. Is this going to be another side-by-side thing?
It will be.
Oh, good.
So there'll be a couple of quantum dot TVs. There'll be an LED projector from digital projection. I was expecting to have a laser phosphor projector from Sony, but they just pulled out this morning, unfortunately.
Oh, dang!
Yeah, they said the prototype wasn't going to be ready in time. So, what are you going to do?
You might approach Epson. They've got a laser phosphor hybrid projector, the LS10000.
Do you know what the color gamut is on it?
I don't. I
doubt it's been developed for 2020.
No, I agree. Probably not. The digital projection LED is 2020. I'm pretty sure.
Yes, it's very, very close to 2020. So that's why I'm very anxious to see how it's going to render this content.
Yeah. Well, so if people, this is going to be in Orlando, June 15th and 16th. Really wish I could be there. Man, I wish I could be there. But I'm in the throes of preparing for CE Week, which is the following week.
Yeah.
So I just can't take the time. But those who might be in the Orlando area or might want to actually travel to it, where can they get more information?
DisplaySummit.com.
How easy. Man, I wish everything was that easy. Well, I wish I was going to be there, and I wish you all the great success at that. And also, thank you so much for taking the time out of a very busy show schedule, I'm sure, to speak with us directly from the press room at the Society of Information Display, SID Display Week. It's been a great hour talking with you. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Scott. I really appreciate it. It was fun discussing this. We'll have to chat again.
Let's do, shall we?
Yeah.
All right. So Chris Chinnock there, his main website is insightmedia.com. And I also encourage you to go to displaysummit.com to get more information about that conference coming up in a couple of weeks. And if you... Oh, I'm sorry. Which one is it? My mistake. Insightmedia.info. Chris, did I? It's info, right? Okay.
We publish also on displaydaily.com for more coverage of this show and others.
Okay. Displaydaily.com, insightmedia.info, my mistake, and displaysummit.com for the show coming up in a couple of weeks.
Yes, sir.
Great. Thank you very much. I want to make sure I get that right. You can always find me, of course, at avsforum.com. You can email me at scott@twit.tv. And you can follow me on Twitter at htgeekscott, also at avsforum. And you can always find previous episodes of Home Theater Geeks right here at twit.tv/htg, and also on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/twit Home Theater Geeks. Next week, my guest geek is scheduled to be Brian Vessa, who is the executive director of audio mastering at Sony Pictures. And he has told me that he has some things he wants to talk about with regard to home theater and how his work ends up in the home. So I'm sure it will be fascinating. He's a really interesting guy. This will be his second appearance on the show, and I look forward to that very much. And I do hope you will join us. Until then, geek out.